I'm Mary Alexander. I'm Collections Officer from Guildford Museum, which means that I'm in charge of all the objects here. And the object I've chosen to talk about is a Saxon brooch. It's called a great square-headed brooch. It's from the pagan Anglo-Saxon cemetery outside Guildford on the hill called Guildford. It dates to somewhere between 500 and perhaps 540, that's years AD, at the period when the Saxons were still pagans and buried objects in the graves with the dead people. It used to be thought that they were buried with objects to use in the afterlife, but it's more likely that the objects they were buried with showed their status in this life. This is a very expensive and fairly rare type of brooch. It was worn by a woman, and she would have been obviously quite a wealthy and influential woman. Brooches like this were used to fasten clothing. They wore a simple tunic fastened over the shoulders with a pair of brooches, one either side, and a larger brooch like this probably fastened a cloak around their shoulders. It's fairly big and solid. It's 4 3/4 inches long. It fits easily into the palm of my hand, and it's fairly heavy. We have to give these types of brooches names because we don't know what the Anglo-Saxons called them, and because at this period people weren't writing down much what was happening, we have to study the objects that we find and try and relate them to each other and build up a history of them and try and find dates from how they relate to each other and to other known objects. So we haven't got a close date for this, but it is in the first part of the 6th century. It's made of bronze, or strictly speaking copper alloy, because the amounts of the different metals in it can vary. So it's a mixture of copper with tin and perhaps a bit of zinc. And it has been gilded, and you can see, I think, traces of the gilding in places, a line near the top and on the lobes down here. It would have been made in a mould. The original would have been carved out of a block of beeswax, and you can see, I think, from the detail on it how it would have been carved out in that fairly soft material, and then it would be enclosed within 2 parts of a clay mould. The wax, the whole thing would have been warmed up, so the wax melted and ran out, and then the melted copper alloy would be poured in to take exactly the same shape as the wax original. It's not flat, it has a curved bow in the centre holding the head, the upper part, and the rest of it. And in this case, the attachment for the pin has been cast into it as well in the copper alloy. There are traces of an iron pin left at the head and also underneath the clasp at the back, but otherwise the back is plain. The decoration is typically Anglo-Saxon, with a lot of interlacing lines, though not as sinuous as a lot of Anglo-Saxon jewellery was, but you can see that every space has been filled in with concentric lines, short stretches, a bit like a section of a rainbow, filling in the space. At the bottom there is a head, more or less human, which the wearer would see as they looked down on it, but for the camera it's easier to turn it upside down. You can see a long central nose and the two eyes. And there's probably another face here at the opposite end. The excavator could see 13 faces in this, and I think he was referring to these areas around here. I'm not entirely sure that they're faces, but they could be. It was a popular device in Saxon jewellery, and also animal forms, faces, heads were popular as well. But I can't see a huge amount of animal ornament in this myself, but that's one of the beauties of Saxon jewellery, that you can see all sorts of things in it if you look hard enough. Although it was a brooch, as we've seen, there are 4 holes drilled into it, which may well have been for sewing it to the cloak, so it was already there when you needed to put the cloak on and fasten it. The style is sometimes called chip carving, and I think you can see why, because it's sort of carved into the original form of the brooch when it was in the wax stage. And it partly carries on from late Roman metalwork, but it has the particularly vigorous Anglo-Saxon style which was introduced into this country after the Romans had left. It's a very important brooch for Guildford and for Surrey, because it shows that the settlement at Guildford was quite an early Saxon settlement. It may even have started in the late 400s. This is from the early 500s. And because of other objects in the cemetery, it may have been a group of important people living there. And it's a quite early settlement for Surrey. The other early Saxon settlements are nearer London, at Mitcham, for example, where there's also a great square-headed brooch. And the distribution of these brooches, the places where they were found, suggest Anglo-Saxons moving into England along the Thames and then spreading out from there into Surrey and the southwest and up towards the Midlands. Surrey itself is a Saxon area. There doesn't seem to have been any earlier area of land which was known as Surrey. The word Surrey is Anglo-Saxon. It means the southern region, and I think that possibly Surrey was a small independent kingdom at first, perhaps in the late 400s, from around 500, but that it quite quickly was taken over by a larger kingdom, obviously based to the north of Surrey, perhaps the kingdom in Middlesex, or perhaps an outshoot of Mercia or Essex, somewhere north of the Thames anyway. Because the boundaries are fairly self-contained, but the very name suggests that it relates to somewhere north of Surrey. But I think that might possibly be a slightly later development. And so this brooch might show us some of the early rulers of Surrey who carved the county or kingdom out of existing Roman land and set themselves up as rulers there as part of the much wider Anglo-Saxon kingdoms.